The USS Thunderstrike moved through the darkness of space like a predator hunting in the void. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the stars pass by through the main view screen. His ship was the newest and most dangerous warship humanity had ever built. The crew of 800 men and women had been handpicked for this mission. They were the best of the best. Commander Lisa Kane sat at her tactical station running diagnostics on the weapon systems. The Thunderstrike carried more firepower than most alien fleets. Nuclear missiles, kinetic cannons, and experimental antimatter torpedoes filled the weapon bays. Other species in the galaxy thought humans were crazy for building such destructive ships. They preferred elegant energy weapons and defensive shields. Humans preferred overwhelming force and thick armor. The ship had been on patrol for 3 weeks along the outer edge of human space. It was supposed to be a routine mission to show the flag and remind everyone that Earth was still watching. The galaxy was mostly peaceful these days. Most species had learned that picking fights with humans was a bad idea. The few that tried usually ended up regretting it quickly. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes worked in the engine room making final adjustments to their new quantum drive. The technology was still experimental, but it could push the ship faster than anything else in known space. Most alien races took months to travel between star systems. Humans had cut that time down to days through pure engineering stubbornness and a willingness to take risks that made other species nervous. Navigator Amy Foster plotted their course through a particularly dangerous section of space filled with asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies. She had chosen the route because it would cut 2 days off their patrol time. Other species avoided such areas completely. They said it was too risky and not worth the potential damage to their ships. Humans saw it as a challenge and a shortcut. The bridge was quiet except for the steady hum of the engines and the occasional beep from the sensor stations. Morrison liked it that way. His crew was professional and knew their jobs. They did not need constant chatter or meaningless status reports. When something important happened, they would speak up. Until then, they focused on their work. That peaceful quiet was broken when Communications Officer Brad Turner suddenly straightened at his station. His face went pale as he listened to something through his earpiece. He quickly ran the signal through the ship's computer systems and began decoding what appeared to be an encrypted message. Morrison walked over Turner's station and looked at the readout. The signal was weak and badly damaged, but it was definitely human in origin. It was coming from the direction of the Centauri colonies, which were supposed to be safe behind 3 layers of defense fleets. The encryption was military-grade and marked as highest priority. Turner worked quickly to clean up the signal and make it understandable. The computer systems on the Thunderstrike were some of the most advanced in human space. They could decode and enhance communications that other ships would never even detect. After several minutes of work, Turner managed to get a clear version of the message. The voice that came through the speakers belonged to Admiral Rick Stone. Morrison knew him personally from their days at the Naval Academy. Stone was a careful man who never exaggerated or panicked. That made his words even more frightening as they echoed through the bridge. The message was simple and terrifying. An unknown alien force calling themselves the Hegemony had attacked the Centauri system. Without warning, they had destroyed the orbital defense platforms in less than an hour. 3 colony worlds had gone silent, and their entire populations were presumed dead or captured. The enemy fleet was massive, and their technology was unlike anything humans had ever seen. Stone's voice continued with tactical details that made Morrison's blood run cold. The alien ships were enormous and seemed to be made of some kind of living metal that could repair itself. Their weapons cut through human shields and armor like they were made of paper. Conventional tactics had failed completely. Multiple human fleets had engaged the enemy and been wiped out without causing significant damage in return. Intelligence Officer Kate Brown ran the message through her analysis computers and cross-referenced it with everything in their databases. The results were not encouraging. The Hegemony was completely unknown to human intelligence. There were no records of first contact or previous encounters. They had appeared from deep space and immediately began attacking. Morrison called his senior officers to the bridge for an emergency meeting. Chief Medical Officer Helen Ross arrived first, followed by Security Chief Maria Santos and Weapons Officer Nick Collins. Chief Gunner Sam Price was the last to arrive, still wiping grease from his hands after working on the main cannon. Systems. Morrison played the message again for his officers and watched their faces as they absorbed the implications. The Centauri system was home to over 50 million human colonists. If the enemy had really conquered it that quickly, then the death toll would be enormous. More importantly, it meant that something new and dangerous had entered. Human space. Kate Brown presented her analysis of the tactical situation. According to the scattered reports from surviving ships, the hegemony fleet consisted of hundreds of massive vessels. Each one was larger than anything humans had ever built. Their weapons seemed to be some kind of advanced energy system that could punch through any known defense. Their ships could apparently heal battle damage and adapt to new threats in real time. The intelligence reports also mentioned that the hegemony had been conquering other species for centuries. They had a reputation across the galaxy as an unstoppable force that had never been defeated. Dozens of advanced civilizations had fallen to their fleets. Some had surrendered without fighting once they learned the hegemony was coming. Others had fought desperately and been crushed anyway. Morrison looked at his officers and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. The Thunderstrike was just one ship against what sounded like an enormous enemy fleet. By any reasonable standard, they should turn around and head back to Earth to report the situation. Command would probably order a full retreat and try to negotiate some kind of peace treaty, but Morrison knew that was not how humans worked. When faced with a bully, humans had a tendency to punch back twice as hard. The colonies needed help, and the Thunderstrike was the only ship in position to provide it. The fact that they were outnumbered meant nothing. Humans had been winning impossible fights since they first picked up rocks and started throwing them. At Predators, Chief Engineer Peter Hayes reported that the quantum drive was ready for extended operation. They could reach the Centauri system in less than 4 days if they pushed the engines to maximum output. It would be risky and would probably burn out several components, but the ship could handle it. Morrison made his decision without hesitation. The Thunderstrike would proceed to Centauri at maximum speed and engage the enemy fleet. His officers nodded their agreement without question. They knew the odds were terrible, but that had never stopped humans before. Someone had to make a stand and show these aliens that humanity would not go quietly into the dark. The course was laid in and the quantum drive engaged. The USS Thunderstrike disappeared into hyperspace, heading toward what would either be their greatest victory or their final battle. The USS Thunderstrike dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Centauri system and immediately began scanning for enemy contacts. What they found made even the most experienced crew members stop and stare. The space around the 3 colony worlds was filled with the twisted remains of destroyed ships from dozens of different species. Huge chunks of metal and debris floated in slowly expanding clouds that stretched for millions of kilometers. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, looking at the tactical display with growing anger. The wreckage belonged to ships from the Valerian Republic, the Keth Confederacy, and at least 6 other major powers. These were some of the most advanced military forces in the galaxy, and they had been completely destroyed. Some of the ship fragments were still glowing from whatever weapons had torn them apart. Commander Lisa Kane worked frantically at her sensor station, trying to get a clear picture of the enemy fleet. The hegemony ships were massive beyond anything in their databases. Each vessel was easily 3 times the size of the Thunderstrike, and their hulls seemed to be made of some kind of organic material that pulsed with its own internal light. The computer counted over 400 enemy ships arranged in perfect geometric formations around each colony world. Navigation Officer Amy Foster plotted evasive courses through the debris fields while trying to avoid detection. The Thunderstrike was built for stealth as much as firepower, and its advanced sensor dampeners made it nearly invisible unless someone was looking directly at it. They moved carefully between the larger pieces of wreckage, using the destroyed ships as cover. Communications Officer Brad Turner intercepted dozens of alien transmissions and began feeding them through the translation computers. Most of the messages were in languages they had never heard before, but the ship's artificial intelligence was good at finding patterns and making educated guesses. What they learned was both encouraging and terrifying. The alien communications revealed that the hegemony fleet commanders were arguing among themselves about what to do next. They had expected to move on to their next target immediately, but something was making them nervous. Several messages mentioned detecting an unknown ship in the system, but they could not get a clear sensor lock on it. More interesting were the transmissions from surviving defenders who were hiding in asteroid fields and behind the moons of the outer planets. A Valerian commander named Zachthel was trying to coordinate rescue operations for civilians trapped on the colony worlds. His messages were desperate and filled with warnings about the hopelessness of fighting the hegemony intelligence officer. Kate Brown analyzed the enemy tactical formations and found something unexpected. The hegemony ships were arranged for maximum firepower projection, but they showed no concern for protecting their flanks or rear airs. Their formations assumed that any enemy would attack from the front in organized battle lines. It was the kind of tactical thinking that worked against civilized opponents who followed established rules of warfare. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes reported that their quantum drive had performed better than expected during the journey. The experimental systems were holding up well, and they still had full power available for combat operations. More importantly, the drive's exotic energy signature seemed to be confusing the enemy sensors. The hegemony ships could detect that something was in the system, but they could not pinpoint its location. Weapons. Officer Nick Collins began preparing the ship's armament for combat, while studying the enemy vessels through the targeting computers. The hegemony ships had energy shields, but they appeared to be designed to deflect the kind of beam weapons that most galactic powers used. Their defensive systems showed no preparation for dealing with kinetic projectiles or nuclear warheads. Security. Chief Maria Santos organized boarding parties and prepared the ship's complement of Marines for potential close combat operations. The Thunderstrike carried 300 heavily armed soldiers who specialized in ship-to-ship fighting. Most alien species considered boarding actions to be primitive and barbaric, but humans had never stopped training for close-quarters combat. Chief Medical Officer Helen Ross established emergency medical stations throughout the ship and prepared to treat both human and alien casualties. Her databases contained medical information on dozens of species, but the hegemony was completely unknown. She would have to improvise treatments based on basic biological principles. Chief Gunner Sam Price ran final diagnostics on the main weapon systems and reported full readiness across all batteries. The Thunderstrike mounted weapons that other species considered unnecessarily destructive. Nuclear-tipped missiles, kinetic railguns, and antimatter torpedoes filled the weapon bays. Price had been looking forward to testing them against a worthy opponent. The ship moved deeper into the system using stealth and careful maneuvering to avoid detection. They passed close enough to one of the colony worlds to see hegemony landing craft moving between the surface and their fleet. Massive alien transports were loading what appeared to be captured civilians and resources. The sight made Morrison clench his fists in rage. Flight Officer Jenny Wood launched a handful of stealth reconnaissance drones to gather more detailed intelligence on enemy positions and capabilities. The small unmanned craft were nearly undetectable and could get much closer to the enemy ships than the Thunderstrike could safely manage. They began transmitting back detailed scans of hegemony hull configurations and weapon placements. The drone data revealed that the enemy ships were even stranger than they had initially appeared. The hulls were definitely organic and seemed to be constantly changing and adapting. Weapon ports opened and closed like breathing orifices, and the entire surface of each ship rippled with what looked like muscular contractions. It was as if the hegemony had grown their fleet rather than building it. Communications Officer Turner intercepted a transmission that made everyone on the bridge pay attention. A hegemony fleet commander was reporting to his superiors about the mysterious energy readings they had been detecting. The alien officer sounded frustrated and confused as he described sensor contacts that appeared and disappeared without explanation. The transmission was in the hegemony's own language, but the computer's translation protocols were improving rapidly. The enemy commander was asking for permission to begin a systematic search of the entire system. He believed that some kind of advanced stealth vessel was observing their operations and wanted to hunt it down before it could report their positions. His superior's response was immediate and arrogant. The hegemony leadership dismissed the possibility that any species in this region of space possessed technology advanced enough to threaten them. They had been conquering civilizations for over 1,000 years and had never encountered an opponent they could not easily defeat. The alien commander was ordered to ignore the sensor anomalies and continue with their planned operations. The hegemony fleet would finish loading captured resources and prisoners, then move on to their next target. Any local defenders who remained were to be hunted down and destroyed as examples to other species who might consider resistance. Morrison listened to the translation and felt his anger turn into cold determination. The hegemony clearly viewed the destruction of entire civilizations as routine business. They had become so successful at conquest that they had grown overconfident and careless. That overconfidence would be their weakness and humanity's opportunity. Kate Brown completed her analysis of enemy formations and tactical patterns. The hegemony relied entirely on overwhelming firepower and superior numbers. They had never needed to develop sophisticated battle tactics because they had never faced serious opposition. Their ships were powerful, but they fought in predictable patterns that assumed their enemies would be too frightened or too weak to mount effective counterattacks. Morrison called his senior officers together for a final planning session. The USS Thunderstrike was alone against impossible odds, but they had several advantages that the enemy did not know about. Human weapons and tactics were completely unknown to the hegemony. Their stealth systems were more advanced than anything the aliens had encountered. Most importantly, humans had a reputation for doing the impossible. When their backs were against the wall, the plan they developed was simple and insane in equal measure. The Thunderstrike would announce its presence by attacking the largest enemy formation with everything they had. The goal was not to win a conventional battle, but to cause maximum chaos and confusion while proving that the hegemony was not as invincible as they believed. Captain Jake Morrison gave the order, and the USS Thunderstrike dropped its stealth systems while powering up every weapon system at once. The ship emerged from behind a massive piece of debris like a predator jumping out of tall grass. Alarm! Signals immediately began screaming throughout the hegemony fleet as their sensors finally detected the human warship that had been stalking them. Chief Gunner Sam Price opened fire with the ship's main battery before the enemy could react. 6 nuclear-tipped missiles streaked across space toward the nearest hegemony vessel, while the kinetic railguns charged up for their first salvo. The alien ship tried to raise its energy shields, but the technology was designed to stop beam weapons and particle cannons. Nuclear warheads were something completely outside their experience. The missiles struck the hegemony ship's hull and detonated in brilliant flashes of atomic fire. The organic metal that made up the alien vessel began to burn and bubble as the nuclear plasma ate through it like acid. Massive sections of the enemy ship simply vanished in the explosions, while the rest of the hull writhed and twisted as if it were in agony. Hegemony Fleet Commander Vorthik screamed orders at his subordinates from the bridge of his flagship. The alien officer had conquered dozens of star systems and had never seen weapons like the ones the mysterious ship was using. His tactical computers were giving him readings that made no sense. The enemy vessel was smaller than most of his escort ships, but it was producing more firepower than entire fleets. Communications Officer Brad Turner intercepted the frantic alien transmissions and played them through the bridge speakers. The translation computer was working overtime to keep up with the flood of panicked messages. Hegemony ship commanders were demanding to know what species would be insane enough to attack their superior forces with such primitive but effective weapons. Morrison activated the ship's communication system and broadcast on all hegemony frequencies. His voice was calm and steady as he delivered humanity's first official greeting to the alien invaders. The message was simple and direct in the way that humans preferred. They were from Earth, and they specialized in making bad days worse for anyone who threatened innocent people. The response from the hegemony was immediate outrage and disbelief. Vorthek demanded to know how such a small and obviously inferior species had managed to build weapons capable of harming his advanced vessels. His tone suggested that he viewed the attack as some kind of cosmic joke rather than a serious military threat. Weapons. Officer Nick Collins answered the alien commander by firing the ship's main kinetic cannon. The magnetic accelerator launched a tungsten rod at nearly 10% of light speed directly at the hegemony flagship. The projectile punched through the alien ship's shields like they were made of paper and tore a hole completely through the vessel from bow to stern. The kinetic projectile continued its deadly path and struck 2 more enemy ships before its energy was finally spent. The tungsten rod had been traveling so fast that the alien hulls had no time to adapt or heal. The damage was instant and catastrophic. 3 of the most powerful ships in the hegemony fleet were crippled or destroyed by a single shot. Navigation. Officer Amy Foster threw the Thunderstrike into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have torn apart any other ship in known space. The human vessel rolled and twisted through the debris field while enemy fire tried desperately to track its movements. Hegemony energy beams meant to vaporize entire cities missed their target by hundreds of kilometers. The alien fleet began to swarm toward the lone human ship like angry insects. Dozens of massive vessels broke formation and charged forward with their weapons blazing. Their commanders assumed that overwhelming numbers would quickly crush the small enemy vessel. They had used the same tactic successfully against every other species they had encountered. Security Chief Maria Santos activated the ship's experimental teleporter system and began beaming armed Marines directly onto enemy vessels. The hegemony ships had no defense against boarding parties, because they had never encountered an enemy willing to fight at close quarters. Human soldiers appeared in alien corridors carrying fusion charges and assault weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat. The boarding teams moved through the organic corridors of the enemy vessels with deadly efficiency. Chief Gunner Price had trained them well in the art of fighting inside enemy ships. They planted explosive charges in vital areas while fighting off alien crew members, who were completely unprepared for hand-to-hand combat. Flight Officer Jenny would launch the ship's fighter squadrons even though everyone knew it was practically a suicide mission. The small human craft were vastly outnumbered, but they had advantages that the enemy could not anticipate. Human pilots were willing to take risks that other species considered insane, and their fighters carried weapons that could punch holes in ships 100 times their size. The fighter pilots screamed through the battle zone, dodging energy beams and missile swarms while looking for targets of opportunity. They used the debris from destroyed ships as cover and fired their weapons at point-blank range before diving away from return fire. Several pilots deliberately rammed their damaged fighters into enemy vessels when their weapons ran out of ammunition. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes pushed the ship's quantum drive beyond all safety limits to give the Thunderstrike speed and maneuverability that defied the laws of physics. The experimental engine systems were never designed to operate at such extreme levels, but they held together through pure engineering stubbornness and the refusal of human technology to quit when lives were at stake. Intelligence Officer Kate Brown analyzed the enemy's tactical responses and discovered something important. The hegemony fleet was powerful, but it fought according to rigid patterns that had worked against previous opponents. They expected enemies to retreat when faced with superior numbers. They assumed that rational beings would surrender rather than face certain destruction. The alien commanders were becoming increasingly frustrated as their standard tactics failed against the human ship. Vorthek ordered his vessels to form a massive sphere around the Thunderstrike and fire all weapons simultaneously. It was a tactic that had destroyed entire enemy fleets in previous battles. Morrison watched the enemy formation develop and smiled grimly. The hegemony was making the same mistake that bullies had been making since the beginning of time. They assumed that their size and numbers would be enough to intimidate their opponents into submission. They had never encountered a species that got more dangerous when cornered. The human captain ordered all remaining missiles fired at once while the kinetic cannons charged up for maximum output. The thunderstrike would not go down quietly or easily. If the aliens wanted to destroy them, they would have to pay a price that would make the entire galaxy take notice. Chief Medical Officer Helen Ross worked frantically in the ship's medical bay, treating wounded crew members while monitoring damage reports from throughout the vessel. The thunderstrike was taking punishment that would have destroyed any other ship, but human engineering was built to survive and keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. The space around the human warship erupted in nuclear fire as dozens of missiles found their targets. Enemy ships that had survived for centuries began dying as human weapons tore through their organic hulls. The hegemony was learning that humans did not fight fair, and they did not know when to quit. Vorthak stared at his tactical display in growing horror as ship after ship reported critical damage or complete destruction. The small human vessel had somehow destroyed or crippled nearly 50 of his most powerful ships. His fleet was beginning to spread out and retreat, as individual commanders decided that survival was more important than following orders. The alien fleet commander realized that he was facing something completely new and terrifying. These humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to prove. They used weapons that civilized species had abandoned as too dangerous and tactics that military experts would call insane. Most importantly, they seemed to get stronger and more determined as the odds against them increased. Morrison looked at his tactical display and saw that the hegemony formation was beginning to break apart. Some enemy ships were pulling back while others continued to close in for the kill. The alien fleet was no longer fighting as a coordinated unit. They were becoming a mob of individual ships trying to destroy a single opponent that refused to die easily. News of the impossible battle spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Surviving ships from dozens of species that had hidden during the hegemony attack began broadcasting reports of what they were witnessing. A single human vessel was somehow winning against the most feared military force in known space. Species that had surrendered without fighting began to wonder if they had made a mistake. The USS Thunderstrike continued its deadly dance through the debris field, while enemy ships exploded around it like deadly fireworks. Captain Jake Morrison had lost count of how many alien vessels his crew had destroyed, but the tactical display still showed hundreds of enemies closing in from all directions. The odds were impossible, but his crew fought with the kind of desperate fury that made humans dangerous. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes worked miracles in the engine room while damage control teams raced to repair battle damage throughout the ship. The Thunderstrike was bleeding atmosphere and energy from a dozen hull breaches, but the human vessel refused to die. Hayes had jury-rigged captured alien technology with human systems, creating hybrid weapons that combined the best of both civilizations. Engineer Officer Dan Miller took apart alien power cores and connected them to human weapon systems in ways that should have been impossible. His improvised solutions worked because humans approached engineering problems with practical creativity rather than following established scientific rules. The result was weapons that fired faster and hit harder than anything either species had developed separately. The hegemony brought in reinforcements from across the star system, including their massive flagship that had conquered thousands of worlds. The bio-dreadnought was easily 10 times larger than the Thunderstrike and carried enough firepower to sterilize entire planets. Its commander, Supreme War Leader Threshmak, could not understand how primitive beings were defeating technology that had taken millennia to perfect. Communications Officer Brad Turner intercepted increasingly frantic transmissions between hegemony ships as their commanders tried to coordinate attacks against an enemy that refused to follow any known tactical patterns. The aliens kept trying to predict where the human ship would go next, but Morrison and his crew made decisions based on instinct and aggression rather than military doctrine. Flight Officer Jenny Wood led what remained of the human fighter squadrons in attacks that other species would consider completely insane. Her pilots deliberately flew their small craft through enemy formation cores where defensive fire was so thick that survival seemed impossible. They used the confusion to plant nuclear mines on alien hulls before escaping through debris clouds. The fighter pilots had learned to use everything around them as weapons. Damaged ships became guided missiles aimed at enemy vessels. Chunks of debris became kinetic projectiles launched by tractor beams. Even their own fighters became weapons when pilots with disabled craft chose to ram them into vital enemy systems rather than eject to safety, navigation. Officer Amy Foster pushed the Thunderstrike through maneuvers that violated every safety regulation ever written. The ship dove through gravity wells and used asteroid impacts to change course in ways that enemy targeting computers could not predict. Other species built their vessels for safety and comfort, but humans built theirs to survive punishment and keep fighting. The space battle had grown beyond anything in galactic history as more ships arrived from both sides. Human vessels responding to distress calls began dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, while hegemony reinforcements poured in from their conquered territories. The Centauri system became a massive battlefield where two completely different approaches to warfare clashed violently. Intelligence. Officer Kate Brown discovered that human tactics were spreading to the surviving alien defenders, who had been hiding throughout the system. Valerian and Keth commanders were copying human attack patterns and weapon choices. They began using ramming attacks and boarding parties instead of the elegant long-range duels they preferred. The galaxy was learning that sometimes the crude approach worked better than sophisticated technology. Security Chief Maria Santos led boarding parties onto the enemy flagship using stolen alien teleporter technology combined with human assault tactics. The Hegemony dreadnought was so large that it contained thousands of alien crew members, but they were completely unprepared for humans, who fought with knives and explosives in addition to energy weapons. The boarding teams moved through the organic corridors of the massive ship like a virus spreading through a living body. They planted fusion charges in vital systems while fighting running battles with alien defenders, who had never experienced close combat. The Hegemony had always relied on their superior technology to win battles from a safe distance. Chief Medical Officer Helen Ross treated wounded crew members while analyzing captured alien biotechnology. She discovered that the Hegemony ships were not just organic but were actually living creatures that had been modified for warfare. The aliens had grown their fleet rather than building it, which explained why the vessels could heal damage and adapt to new threats. Weapons Officer Nick Collins coordinated the ship's firepower with the growing number of human reinforcements that were arriving in the system. Earth had sent every available warship as soon as they received word of the alien invasion. The human fleet was still outnumbered, but they brought weapons and tactics that the Hegemony had never encountered. Chief Science Officer Ben Carter made a discovery that changed everything. The organic ships of the Hegemony fleet shared a collective consciousness that allowed them to coordinate perfectly, but also created a fatal weakness. If the neural networks connecting the ships could be disrupted, the entire fleet would lose its tactical advantage and become vulnerable to conventional attacks. Morrison ordered all human ships to target the bioneural nodes that Carter had identified on the enemy vessels. The Hegemony had never needed to protect these systems because no previous opponent had understood how their technology worked. Human weapons began tearing into the alien neural networks with devastating effect. The results were immediate and catastrophic for the Hegemony fleet. Ships that had been coordinating perfectly suddenly began firing on each other or flying into obstacles. The alien vessels lost their ability to heal battle damage as their biological systems went into shock. Individual ship commanders found themselves isolated and confused without the collective intelligence they had always relied on. Threshmack watched his fleet fall apart around him as the human attack disrupted everything his people had built over centuries of conquest. The bio-dreadnought that had been his pride was dying as its nervous system burned out under the assault of weapons designed specifically to cause neural damage. His crew was screaming in pain as their connection to the ship's consciousness was severed. The tide of battle turned completely as more Human ships arrived and the hegemony fleet lost its coordination. Species throughout the system that had been hiding began to emerge and join the fight. The aliens who had seemed unstoppable just hours before were now fleeing in panic as their technological advantages disappeared. Morrison stood on the bridge of his battered ship and watched enemy vessels retreating toward the edge of the system. The Thunderstrike had taken damage that should have destroyed it 3 times over, but human engineering and pure stubbornness had kept it fighting. His crew had proven that the galaxy did not belong to the strongest or the smartest, but to those willing to pay any price to keep it free. The battle was not over yet, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The hegemony had learned that there was at least one species in the galaxy that would not bow down to tyranny. Humans had shown everyone that the seemingly invincible could be defeated by those who refused to give up no matter how bad the odds became. The USS Thunderstrike limped through the debris field that had once been the pride of the hegemony fleet. Captain Jake Morrison stood on his damaged bridge, watching the scattered remains of alien ships drift past his viewscreen. The battle had raged for 18 hours and left both fleets devastated, but only one side was still fighting. The other was running for their lives. Supreme War Leader Threshmack broadcast his final message to the surviving ships of his once mighty armada. The alien commander's voice was filled with something that the hegemony had never experienced before in their 1,000 years of conquest. Fear. He ordered all remaining vessels to retreat immediately and warned other hegemony forces to avoid human space at all costs. The mad species that fought without regard for death had taught them a lesson they would never forget. Chief Science Officer Ben Carter monitored the alien communications and reported that enemy ships throughout the galaxy were receiving warnings about humanity. The hegemony was spreading word that humans were too dangerous to fight using conventional methods. Several alien commanders were recommending that entire star systems be avoided rather than risk encountering another human warship. Communications Officer Brad Turner picked up messages from Earth Command as human reinforcements continued to arrive in the system. Admiral Sarah Blake had taken personal command of the relief fleet and was coordinating rescue operations on the 3 colony worlds. Her first priority was saving the millions of human civilians who had been captured by the aliens during their initial assault. The rescue operations revealed the true horror of what the hegemony had planned for humanity. The aliens had not been interested in simply conquering human space. They had been preparing to harvest the entire population for use as slave labor in their biological weapon factories. Millions of humans had been loaded onto transport ships destined for processing centers in distant galaxies. Flight Officer Jenny Wood led squadrons of human fighters in attacks on the fleeing alien transports. The enemy ships were trying to escape with their human cargo, but they had not counted on the fury of pilots who knew their own families might be among the prisoners. The fighter attacks were devastating and methodical as they disabled transport after transport. Security Chief Maria Santos coordinated boarding operations to rescue captured civilians from the alien ships. Her teams fought through the organic corridors of the bio-transports while medics worked to treat humans who had been subjected to alien experiments. The rescue operations were dangerous and costly, but no human prisoner would be left behind if there was any way to save them. Chief Medical Officer Helen Ross established emergency medical centers on the colony worlds to treat both human and alien casualties. She had learned enough about hegemony biology during the battle to provide basic medical care to wounded enemy survivors. Despite everything the aliens had done, she refused to let anyone die from treatable injuries. The medical teams discovered that many of the captured humans had been subjected to biological modifications designed to make them more suitable for slave labor. The alien experiments were crude and painful, but they were also reversible with proper treatment. Every human prisoner would eventually be able to return to normal life, though the psychological scars would take longer to heal. Chief Engineer Peter Hayes worked with teams from the relief fleet to repair the Thunderstrike and get her ready for the journey home. The ship had taken damage that should have destroyed her several times over, but human engineering had kept her fighting until the battle was won. She would need months of repairs, but she would fly again. Intelligence Officer Kate Brown compiled battle reports and tactical analyses that would be studied by military academies throughout human space for generations. The Battle of Centauri had proven that human weapons and tactics could defeat any enemy no matter how advanced their technology might be. More importantly, it had shown that courage and determination could overcome seemingly impossible odds. Navigation. Officer Amy Foster plotted courses for the human fleet to escort the rescued prisoners back to Earth. The journey would take several weeks, but every ship would be protected by warships, equipped with the new anti-neural weapons that had proven so effective against hegemony biotechnology. No alien force would threaten human civilians again without facing immediate retaliation. The aftermath of the battle sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy as news of the human victory spread to every inhabited system. Species that had surrendered to the hegemony without fighting began to reconsider their position. Rebellions broke out on conquered worlds as enslaved populations realized that the aliens could be defeated. Weapons officer Nick Collins received reports that human weapon designs were being copied by dozens of species who wanted to build their own kinetic cannons and nuclear missile systems. The elegant energy weapons that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia were being replaced by crude but effective human technology that actually worked against advanced enemies. The Valerian Republic officially requested a military alliance with Earth and offered to share their advanced shield technology in exchange for human weapon designs. Similar requests came from over 30 other species who had witnessed the battle and wanted to learn human tactical methods. The galaxy was realizing that sometimes the direct approach worked better than sophisticated strategies. Chief Gunner Sam Price supervised the installation of captured alien technology on human ships throughout the fleet. The bio-neural systems could be modified to work with human computers and would give Earth vessels advantages that no other species possessed. The hegemony's own technology would be turned against them in future battles. Morrison received a message from Earth Command, promoting him to admiral and giving him command of the new alien defense force. His orders were simple but comprehensive. Build a fleet capable of defending not just human space but any species willing to stand against tyranny. The galaxy needed protectors and humanity had volunteered for the job. The final tally of the battle was staggering. The hegemony had lost over 300 ships, including their flagship and most of their experienced commanders. Human losses were also heavy, but the proportion was nothing like what military experts had predicted. One human ship had started a fight that ended with the defeat of the most powerful military force in known space. Captain Morrison made his final log entry from the bridge of the battered Thunderstrike as she prepared to depart for Earth. He wrote that the crew had proven something important about humanity that the galaxy needed to understand. Humans did not fight because they were not afraid to die. They fought because they were afraid to live in a universe ruled by bullies and tyrants. The USS Thunderstrike began her journey home carrying battle honors that would be remembered for 1,000 years. Behind her, the Centauri system was being rebuilt by free peoples who no longer feared the shadow of the hegemony. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the smallest ship could carry the biggest heart and that courage was more powerful than any weapon ever built. As the human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, alien observers throughout the system sent the same message to their governments. A new power had emerged in the galaxy and it fought by rules that no one else understood. The age of easy conquest was over because humanity had entered the game and changed all the rules forever.